Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live episode of Connect the Dots. We are exploring cancer season and the rising medicine of ceremony. The title of the episode that I wrote today is Around Who I Am, Who We Are Around Others. And this is going back to many, many years ago where I didn't realize that I struggled with the main spiritual question, who I am. I had never really been a shy person. As a child, I did a lot of public speaking. I was really outgoing. And so in my 20s, it never occurred to me that this was a problem. And even, later on in life, when I started attending ceremonies, a lot of stuff rose in me that I didn't know what to do with. And this is where ceremonies are really interesting because they weave our sense of self-actualization, whatever level or layer of our self-awareness is, with the actualization of community or the environment or the circle or groups that we are a part of. And this can be really harmonic and really beautiful. And on the other hand, it can be uncomfortable and unpleasant. And I remember the first few ceremonies that I ever went to, if I'm remembering correctly, were women's circles, right? And in a lot of these circles, it would be, 15, 20, sometimes even 25 women. We would gather on like new moons or full moons. And circles went differently, but very often we would have to share our name and share something about what is present with us today. And so very often I would be the first person to share because, I'm not very shy. And then I would have to sit and listen to everyone else. And this is where I first started experiencing discomfort, right? Because I could be having like a perfectly neutral day or a day where I think something's really stressful, say with my job or with my relationship or with my health. And then you hear everyone else's story. You hear what is present with everyone else, what everyone else is carrying, how they're speaking. Maybe they're, jubilant and maybe they're in pain. And a lot of the time in the first few ceremonies I ever attended, I was so caught up in judgment. I was so caught up in feeling less than or greater than other people as they shared what was true and vulnerable for them. And over time, I realized that this was because this is just a muscle that I had practiced really well, right? It's sort of a safety or survival mechanism that a lot of us have in social settings where we are trying to gauge where we're at in reference to everyone else. Oh, this person's story is way worse than mine. I should have compassion. This person's story is so much better than mine. Maybe I'm judgmental. Maybe I want that, right? We're sort of relating from the mind rather than from the place of presence and centeredness. And so over time, as I went to more and more in different types of ceremonies, I actually figured out that there was a level of artificiality around how I was relating. And this is not, in the world of wanting to be authentic and true in who we are and wanting to be seen and accepted for who we are, this is a funny moment where we realize that we are only as authentic as we are connected to our true essential whole selves. When we are compartmentalized, when we are fragmented, when we are only as deep within ourselves as our mind, that is just how authentic we can be. We can be as authentic in those more superficial layers. And so ceremony to me was where I was able to sort of come home in a space of community and learn to develop the capacity to actually hold presence, hold my own presence while sharing what I was sharing, as well as listening to everyone else. Right? And it was this funny question. I remember this was a big crisis of mine in one of these women's ceremonies because I had become aware of this, but I didn't know what to do with it. And so there was this particular ceremony on a particular day where my struggle was, what does it mean to hold presence with others? If I'm listening to you speaking and I'm thinking about my own things, my own memories, what that means for me, what is that? And is there a different way? Am I just sort of empty as I listen to you? And, that has its pros and cons. I don't want to absorb your energy. So it became, again, this sort of place of turmoil. And I remember sharing this in this particular women's circle. And thankfully, it was a smaller group. And I remember as I was like sort of sharing this sort of mental chaos, like how do I relate to people? How do I hold presence? How do I be authentic? How do I honor someone else's authenticity? I had this moment where I looked around and everyone was like, wow, everyone was still, they were looking at me. And for the first time, I was aware that I felt heard and received. And in that moment, I was like, oh, I know I don't do this for others. I know I don't listen to others, at least at that time in my life, with just the sense of true openness, but stability and resilience within myself, right? Normally, why are we ever closed off? We're closed off because something inside isn't strong enough, right? We're in fear, we're in doubt. We'd much rather run off into a memory or our own sort of, nattering of what's happening rather than be here and present with ourselves and with others. Over many, many years and many, many different types of ceremonies, this was a muscle that I learned to build, similar, to how when we go to the gym and we're trying to focus on our arms or our hamstring, we continue to build strength and stability so that, when a moment came, I could actually practice that. And so in this funny way, I learned who I am around others. And this is a really brilliant thing with ceremonies, because in a harmonious, healthy, safe container, we actually get to quiet our minds and sit in presence and figure out what our nervous system reactions are, right? What are our base reactions that very likely originated in childhood or in our adolescent years that we're still sort of running? Like the nervous system has an algorithm, a program, and we're still running that. And so this is a place of difference with simply hanging out in social circles or hanging out with our friends and family and sitting in ceremony and learning to relate. One of the ways I describe ceremony is that for me, there is a place of sacredness, softness, and settling. And that happens because the intention exists. And it's not just intention. To me, there are 4 really important human qualities, human forces that have a marriage and a dance in ceremony. One of them is intention, of course. The other is will, like the will, the desire. And then the third one is action, making a choice, choosing to show up, choosing to host ceremony. The marriage of will and action is really interesting with what we express, what we choose to express, and then how we choose to listen and receive. And that brings us to the fourth one, which is receptivity, right? We have our intention, we have our will, we have our action. And so we've created this ceremony, and then we have to soften, then we have to surrender, and then we have to receive what we have created with our intention, will, and action. And so in social settings, all of this is a little bit maybe merged together, and it's a little hard to delineate, right? Also, we're outside. There's so many variables. There's so many moving parts. And, it's generally, I assume for most people, we engage in social activities because it's fun. We're chatting with friends. We're hanging out with family. We're watching shows and movies. We're out at dinner. And so while we can, at the end of the night or at the end of the week, have time to reflect, which is of course valuable, the sentiment is very different when you are in ceremony proactively engaging intention, will, action, and receptivity. And this is what, at least for me, allows a sense of what is sacred within each and every person to rise. And what is sacred for each person doesn't have to be the same. But when we allow for our own sacredness, for something that is whole and holy within ourselves to rise, at least this has been my experience, more of me shows up. More of the parts of me that were maybe hidden or repressed or disallowed or shamed or, put away for some reason, they can show up in the context of this energetic container. And so this to me is a big part of the invitation in this Cancer season, which we just kicked off last week. It was the summer solstice. We are in peak heat, peak summer, the peak height of the sun in the sky. And Cancer is the element of water, right? And a lot of us may be drawn to water. We might be drawn to drinking more, hydrating more, taking a plunge in a swimming pool or a lake. As well, water is associated with our emotionality, right? Because it's summer, because now it's warm, we may be interested in making more plans, engaging more socially. And that's awesome and that's fun. And a lot of people comment and experience feeling agitated, burnt out, partially because of the heat, right? Maybe you're just dehydrated. As well, on the emotional level, it is often because we're so much in doing, we're so much in action that we forget to sit in respite and sort of take a plunge into our emotional waters simply to see where we are. What is it that is hydrating us? What is it that's dehydrating us with how we're feeling, with our emotions? And to me, that is this beautiful invitation, because today is the new moon in Cancer. So this is the dark moon in the sky. It is the start of a whole new lunar cycle. It is a really good time to take pause, take some time in the evening or early in the morning or even late at night, and just to check in with how you are feeling. And for me, because I am an alchemist, I generally work with elements. And so this morning when I was sitting in my own personal ceremony, I had a few cups of water. 1 cup of water, my intention was I would pour it into a plant. Another cup of water is the water that I would be drinking. And then I had a ceremonial bowl of water, sitting there with some crystals. And I did the work that I was called to do that day. And then it's this action of actually sipping, pouring. And to me, when a lot of times when we're working with our emotionality, it's a bit of a janky experience, right? Our emotions can be dense. They can feel gross. We've been avoiding them for so long. So we're just used to avoiding them. And so the analogies of drinking water, sipping, savoring, those are similar. At least those are what I use when I am doing emotional work. Sit, sip, savor, hydrate. Because in the end, when we look at the earth, when we look at our bodies, a significant portion, like 70% of us, we are water made, right? Like we have plushiness in our skin. Our muscles have animation and form because of the element of water. And so too, the human experience is given life and animation because of our emotions. And so the sacredness of holding ceremony, and again, I say this word sacred, knowing fully well that it means different things to different people. That helps us feel settled in our emotional waters. I'll add one more thing before the close of this video. For a long time, I attended sacred ceremonies that I thought were sacred because because there was a singing bowl, or because it was a native circle and someone called in the directions, called in the ancestors, called in the elements. And I thought that if you do that, if you check those boxes, that becomes a spiritual act and that becomes a ceremony. And that can be true to a certain degree, but I learned over time that you can check the box and do all of the spiritual things. You can close your eyes and sit in perfect posture and perfect lotus. And from the outside, it may look like you are in bliss in meditation. But on the inside, our truth may be something completely different. So what is sacred is less about how we articulate it or what it looks like, and more about the feeling, which is why, especially with some really big Cancer-related transits in this season happening, Jupiter, the planet Jupiter, the largest planet of our solar system, in the sign of Cancer, with the solstice just kicking off, there is a really massive and supported invitation to feel into the ripples and the layers of our emotional body. And that, again, is the invitation on this new moon, should you choose to take it. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for exploring with me the rising role and really healing medicine of sitting in true sacred ceremony, whether we do it for ourselves or whether we host it for others. Have a beautiful day.